My first impression was I was looking at a 6-month-old baby.
The world will not be destroyed by people who do evil, but by people who watch and do nothing.
When Andrea Bradley walked into Cincinnati Children's Hospital holding her daughter's limp body, the nurses thought it was a newborn. Tiny, pale, lips blue, but the chart said she was 2 years old. Her name was Glenera Bates. She weighed just 13 pounds. Her bones through her skin like sticks under stretched wax. Her belly was sunken, her diaper full, and her skin littered with old scars and new wounds. Her teeth, what was left of them, were chipped, broken, or gone. There were marks, and even human marks on her chest and arms. One wound on her head was clumsily stitched with black sewing thread for clothes. And despite the smell of her mother said she had just fallen asleep. The ER team froze. Some cried, one backed out of the room. I thought I was just looking at an infant, one doctor later testified, until I saw the chart. But Glenera hadn't died that day. She had been dying for months, slowly, quietly, in a filthy bathroom tub filled with waste and while adults stepped over her and called it parenting. But this wasn't just neglect. It was methodical. A death by starvation, infection, frostbite, and forced trauma, all wrapped in the silence of a broken system. And the worst part, it didn't have to happen. This case is sickening, but we must tell her story. We must not let her light fade. Glenera Bates came into the world already unwanted. Born January 18, 2013, she weighed just over 4 pounds, premature, frail, and already behind. Her mother, Andrea Bradley, didn't attend a single prenatal appointment. She was 25 years old and already had 6 other children by 4 different men. By then, 2 of those men were incarcerated, a third soon to follow. Andrea tested positive for at Glenera's birth. The baby had low reflexes and clear signs of intrauterine growth restriction. There was no baby shower, no crib, no celebration, just a hospital form, a social worker, and a decision. Remove the child immediately. For once, CPS did the right thing. Glenera was placed with foster parents, Peg and Jim Fontaine, a kind, middle-aged couple who already cared for several of her half-siblings. And something miraculous happened. Glenera started to thrive. Peg would later say she was our Buddha baby, always smiling, always hungry, just a happy little dumpling. Photos from that time showed her pudgy cheeks and chocolate eyes lighting up the room. She laughed, she played. She gained weight fast and hit every developmental milestone. Peg dressed her in soft pinks and purples, fed her bottles, rocked her to sleep. She felt like ours. We were ready to adopt her. And they weren't wrong to try, because Andrea Bradley's record was already stained with a... In 2007, one of her children was born with in their system. In 2009, she was charged with CA after another child arrived at the hospital too bruised to walk. Somehow, Andrea avoided prison. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression, hospitalized briefly, and then released right back to her children. No long-term plan, no accountability, just one more file buried in a county drawer. So when the Fontaines asked the court to let Glenera stay, they expected support. After all, Andrea had shown no signs of rehabilitation, but the judge ruled otherwise. In September 2013, Glenera and her 4 siblings were ordered back into Andrea's care. The judge noted Andrea's progress, citing a clean screen and a parenting class. Monitoring would last only 3 months. Peg was gutted. You want to believe the system protects the babies, but sometimes it protects the wrong people. She and Jim were not ready to give up. They promised to visit Glenera often and stay a part of her life. For a while, they did. Glenera was thin again, but still smiled when she saw them. The light dimmed slowly, like someone drawing the curtain closed, inch by inch. By mid-2014, the Fontaines began to notice changes. Glenera seemed quieter, more distant, and thinner, much, much thinner. Then came December. When they showed up with Christmas presents, the family wouldn't even open the door. And Glenera was never the same again. By the time Glenera was returned to her biological parents, Hamilton County Child Protective Services already knew Andrea Bradley by name, file number, and hospital records. They knew Andrea had 6 children under 10 and no steady home, job, or mental health care. And they still gave her 5 kids back. The logic was simple and terrifying. She had taken a parenting class. She wasn't actively high. She smiled during court, and the man standing next to her, Glenn Bates, the father of baby Glenera, well, he hadn't been officially charged with anything yet. But that man was a monster in plain clothes. Neighbors said he had a temper, that he shouted at the kids in public, that Glenera in particular was always lipping or holding her stomach, or had bruises that weren't there last week. But no one made it formal. People knew how fast CPS closed cases when reports weren't airtight. And Bates? He scared people. Glenera's older siblings later told investigators what CPS missed or ignored. Bates didn't just hit, he targeted. And this time Glenera was the target. He her like a dog, her like a toy, held her upside down by her legs, and called it play. He told police later,
"Cause we be playing like dog, you gonna get you and all of that, and I'm shaking her probably too hard."
But no game ends with marks so deep that they scar, or teeth out of a toddler's mouth. He blamed Andrea. Andrea blamed him. And in between the blame sat a baby girl with no voice, no advocate, and no way out. Peg Fontaine tried. She filed a report after the Christmas incident, and one of the older girls stared blankly out the window like a ghost calling. Peg knew something was wrong. She described Glenera's eyes as hollow, but CPS didn't respond, not until months later, when they finally made a home visit in March 2015. And what did they write? Glenera is happy and healthy. That's what the file said. That's what they called a toddler who hadn't walked in months, who had scars on her back, who was at that moment sleeping on cold porcelain in a blood-stained bathtub. 3 months before Glenera's death, her parents did bring her to the hospital, but not because they wanted help.
She just like real tired and sleepy. Act like she was real sleepy. Just laying down all day.
The baby?
Yeah.
They brought her because she had become visibly tall. Glenera weighed just 17 pounds. That's 3 pounds less than she had weighed at 10 months old. She was almost 2. She couldn't walk, and she could barely lift her arms. Her eyes were sunken, her muscles had wasted away, and she was barely responsive. The medical term was failure to thrive. The real term was starvation. Doctors gave her fluids, kept her in the hospital for 10 days, and watched her gain a tiny bit of weight. And then, instead of alerting authorities or opening an case, they sent her right back home with Andrea and Glenn. No follow-up check, no home inspection, no mandatory report filed. They told Andrea to feed her more. That was it. A starving child with no muscle tone and a visible bone structure. And all they said was, feed her more. Honestly, you guys, if a toddler is starving, shouldn't her parents be held a little more accountable? Andrea smiled, nodded, took Glenera back home, to this home, back to the bathroom, back to the water, the games of and shake. Some nights Glenera was left alone in that bathroom for hours. Once the family left her there with a single can of food and no way to open it. Just a blood-slick tub and 4 freezing walls. And don't even ask me why their bathtub was full of dried blood. Her siblings told police later she ate once a day, maybe. Often, not at all. Sometimes she crawled around licking the floor like a dog, hoping for a crumb or a spill. One of the girls remembered Glenera crying for water. Not juice, not candy, just water. She was slowly, painfully, and in silence. But she wasn't quiet because she was calm. She was quiet because she had no energy left to scream. By the time of her death, she weighed 13 pounds. That's the size of a 4-month-old. Her hair was falling out in clumps. Her skin was paper thin. She wasn't living. She was enduring. And yet, again, no one did anything. Not the doctors, not the social workers, not the neighbors, not the family. Because everyone assumed someone else would step in. That surely someone was doing wellness checks. But they weren't. Hamilton County CPS had closed their monitoring case just months earlier. The judge had ordered only 3 months of follow-up. After that, they trusted Andrea to handle it. That trust Glenera. Every adult in her orbit either hurt her, ignored her, or turned away from her suffering. There was no justice coming. Not yet, not fast enough. And Glenera, this little baby girl with doughy brown eyes and a heart big enough to survive 2 years of hell, was running out of time. Andrea and Glenn didn't just Glenera. They exiled her. While her siblings shared bunk beds and meals and cartoons in the living room, Glenera was banished to the bathroom. Not for timeouts, not for bad behavior, but permanently. That was her room. That was where she ate, she slept, fed, froze, and slowly died in a tub that was stained with old feces and dried blood. On walls with her own desperate fingernails. When police finally searched the house on Hackberry Street, they saw it with their own eyes. The tub wasn't just dirty, it was contaminated. Bits of blood in the drain, skin cells, black smears along the rim, a mess so vile, it made seasoned detectives gag. They found burns on the porcelain, marks. Someone had poured water over that child more than once. And on cold Ohio nights, they didn't even leave her a blanket. The excuse? She makes too much of a mess when she eats, Glenn Bates told the police. When they laughed, Glenera curled into herself and trembled for warmth. Sometimes the siblings peeked in. One girl later testified that Glenera would smile when she saw them. She'd reach out wordlessly, like she hoped someone would rescue her. She never begged. She didn't have the strength. By then, she couldn't walk. She could barely stand, even with help. Her body had eaten through its own muscles just to keep her alive. When she pooped, they didn't change her. When she cried, they told her to shut up. When she whimpered, they turned up the TV. And she stayed in that bathroom until she died in it. Glenn Bates had a word for the things he did to his daughter. He called it playing. That's what he told detectives when they asked about the marks all over Glenera's chest and arms. He said it was a game. He said he'd crawl toward her, growling like a dog, and then down, hard. Sometimes he'd her, you know, like a chew toy.
Show me. I mean, if this was her, show me how you were doing it.
Holding her by her legs up in the air like this, playing with her.
He laughed while he told it, said that she liked it, said she giggled, said it was just what we do, but children don't giggle when their flesh is. They scream, and then they stop screaming when they learn that no one is coming. Forensic analysis confirmed the truth. The marks were deep, painful, and matched exactly to both Andrea Bradley and Glenn Bates. One of the on her chest had broken the skin entirely. She had bruises layered over bruises, welts slashed across her back in jagged, overlapping patterns. Her front teeth gone, out, and the injuries weren't once or twice, they were constant. The coroner found 100 distinct wounds. More injuries than weeks she had lived. And Glenn Bates didn't stop there. On March 28th, the day before Glenera's death, her 10-year-old sister saw something that would haunt her forever. She watched Glenn grab Glenera by the ankles, swing her through the air like a rag doll, and her head into the hallway wall. No warning, no noise, just Glenera screamed for a moment and then went still. That night, Andrea tried to fix it. Not with a hospital trip, not with ice or even concern, no. She pulled out a needle and thread meant for clothing and stitched the head wound shut. The stitches were crooked, dirty, and infected. But she didn't stop. She tucked Glenera back in the bathroom and left her there overnight with brain and no medical care. By morning, the baby was cold, lips blue, eyes still. Even then, they hesitated before driving her to the ER. Andrea wrapped her body in a towel and walked through those hospital doors like she was dropping off laundry. She didn't cry, she didn't explain, she just handed her over. The doctors thought she was 6 months old. She was 2 years old, and her body told a story that no parent ever admitted to. Glenera had been every day for months. And the worst part, neither one of them really ever explained why. They said she was a picky eater, that she cried too much. They said she was clumsy, disobedient, different. This is heartbreakingly common in cases of child parents often latch onto perfectly normal behavior, spilling food, wetting the bed, crying when scared, and twist it into a justification for cruelty. But the trauma they inflict only makes those behaviors worse. Fear leads to regression, and then the child's pain becomes their next excuse. None of their excuses were true, because Glenera was not a problem child. She was just a child, a baby, a little girl who wanted to be loved, and instead got beaten and abandoned. By the time the case hit court, Glenera had been for over a year. But what the jury saw in 2016 wasn't just a timeline. It was a gallery of horror.
The testimony included her showing a pink belt she thinks Glenera was with, and marks that Glenera's father, Glenn Bates, admitted to causing.
The prosecution laid it bare. Over 100 injuries, marks from both parents, wounds so fresh they were still bleeding when she died. A head wound crudely stitched like a rag doll, and a final trauma so violent it caused fatal rotational brain damage. The kind seen in chicken baby syndrome or someone hurled against a wall. Dr. Jennifer Schott, the deputy coroner, told the court plainly, Glenera didn't just die from one act. She died from a life of pain, chronic starvation, repeated abuse, psychological terror. Her body shut down long before her brain did.
Well, it's a combination of starvation and the trauma to the head.
Yes. One juror cried. Another looked away when the photos flashed on the screen. These weren't pixelated evidence shots. They were proof that a child had been tortured in the heart of Cincinnati, and no one had stopped it. Although they can't be released to the public, the images made the news.
What was so disturbing were the images shown here inside the Hamilton County Courthouse. They're ones the jury won't soon forget, even with a weekend break in the trial now.
Glenn Bates sat through it all like he was in a waiting room. No tears, no remorse, just a man caught in a lie too deep to climb out of. He changed his story 3 times. First, he said it was Andrea, all of it. Then he admitted to playing with Glenera, swinging her, hitting her, but insisted it wasn't a. And then finally, he told police that he accidentally dropped her while holding her by the legs, that she slipped out of her shoes and hit her head, that she looked like she always does.
She appeared to be alive?
It seemed like she was, like, 'cause that's how she always be looking like.
Cold, purple-lipped, and silent, like all normal toddlers do, right? Andrea, meanwhile, claimed victimhood, said Bates was abusive, that he manipulated her, and that he once Glenera so hard he tore her skin. But she also stitched her child's head shut with a sewing needle and left her in a bathroom to die. She told the court,
it don't matter what I want. Get a world what they want. The world want the death penalty, give it to them. I don't care.
But she didn't get death. Her IQ was measured at 67, just below the legal threshold for execution. She took a plea deal, 15 years to life. She gave birth to her 8th child in prison. Her attorney says this.
She's been diagnosed with depression and bipolar. So you have someone that's suffering from psychiatric issues, and if it comes into the relationship, well, I think everyone knows what happens then. It takes control.
Glenn Bates wasn't so lucky. The jury convicted him of aggravated murder, child endangerment, and felony murder. The judge sentenced him to death. And yet, in 2023, after appeals and procedural claims of juror misconduct, his sentence was reduced. A new deal was struck, 25 years in prison with 8 already served. He will be eligible for parole in his 50s. There's no parole for Glenera. Her sentence was permanent. Glenera Bates didn't fall through the cracks. She was pushed through them. This was not one missed report, not one overwhelmed social worker. It was failure after failure after failure from an agency that knew she was at risk and still sent her home. CPS had already removed her once. They'd flagged Andrea Bradley years earlier for abuse and They documented her mental health struggles, her unstable relationships, her prior child injury charges. They knew she had too many kids and no support. They knew Glenn Bates had a violent history. They knew from the foster parents, from doctors, from prior cases that Glenera was the most vulnerable of all. And they sent her back anyway. Hamilton County closed the supervision case in just 3 months. The caseworker wrote, "Home appears appropriate. Mother is cooperative. Child is happy and healthy." That was the official record. 3 weeks before Glenera's death, a final home visit confirmed it. No signs of they said, no concern. They signed off, and that signature cost a child her life. Peg and Jim Fontaine, the foster parents who once gave Glenera her only real taste of love, were crushed. They had tried, they had reported, they had begged, and CPS told them, it's out of our hands. After the autopsy photos hit the news, there was a wave of public outrage. CPS director Moira Weir admitted it. "We failed to follow our own rules. 2 caseworkers resigned, 2 supervisors were suspended, but nobody was charged. Nobody went to jail for saying Glenera was healthy. Nobody paid for ignoring the mandatory reporting laws when she was hospitalized for starvation just months earlier."
The county didn't follow any procedures that they had in place for themselves to follow. This child fell through the cracks.
A federal lawsuit was filed by Glenera's grandmother, Desenna Bradley. She argued the agency had full knowledge of the abuse, and yet still threw the child back into the squalor and depravity. Prosecutor Joe Detters said the same.
Yeah, I think they dropped the ball.
This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a system rubber-stamping child, a paper trail of negligence, a baby girl screaming, and no one listening. Afterward, Glenera's siblings were split up and placed into new homes. The 10-year-old sister who testified in court now lives in the countryside. When asked how she feels, she said, "I don't have to go through all that misery anymore. I don't have to go through all that suffering." There's a tiny memorial in Cincinnati now. Peg Fontaine visits often. She brings flowers, sometimes toys, and every time she looks at the photos of the smiling Buddha baby who once danced in her kitchen and wonders what could have been. Because Glenera wasn't just another case. She was a person. Why did it take death for anyone to care? Why do we trust systems that keep handing innocent children back to the people who break them? And if Glenera had been a little louder, a little cuter, a little more marketable, would anyone have listened sooner? Tell me what you think in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts, your anger, your heartbreak. Don't let her story sit in silence. And if you believe in truth, in shining a light on victims the world would rather forget, then hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. We're not here to sensationalize. We're here to remember. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, protect the vulnerable and never look away.